Hello, you can hear me? Hello, okay, welcome everybody to the Sunday afternoon session at Unframe Festival. It's really wonderful to see so many faces in the room. Thank you so much for being here. It's an absolute pleasure to introduce the next session with Lucas Febraro, BDS and the struggle to end complicity. Lucas is a BDS campaigner for Palestinian human rights, and we're really excited to listen to what he has to say for us today. The session will take 35 minutes with the presentation, and then we're going to open up to questions afterwards, and then some closing remarks, so we should be done in about an hour. And if you would like to join me in giving Lucas a really warm welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Khaled. Thanks, everyone, for being here. So today we're obviously going to talk about the BDS movement, and to start with, I'd like to show you a hopefully brief enough presentation that explains a little bit what BDS is, how it came to be, who leads it, what does it want, and how the movement hopes to achieve that. So first, let's take a look at what the BDS movement actually is, which I find that sometimes it's something that people find a little bit difficult to understand, but hopefully we'll clear that up now. So BDS is a worldwide anti-racist, non-violent, and intersectional solidarity movement. All of these words here are important, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into them in due course. And also very important is that it's inspired by the global solidarity campaign that helped end apartheid in South Africa. So it hopes to do, in the case of Israeli apartheid against Palestinians, what a global solidarity movement was able to do, or at least meaningfully help in the case of South Africa. It's led by Palestinian society, more specifically by the Palestinian BDS National Committee, or BNC for short. So it was launched, first of all, in 2005 by an extremely broad coalition of Palestinian civil society organizations, well over 100 of them. And then since 2 years later, since 2007, it's been led by the BNC. And here you can see the current members of the BNC. These are 33 coalitions. So the BNC is a coalition of coalitions, and included in this coalition are all the Palestinian trade unions, NGOs, women's rights organizations, refugee rights organizations, professional syndicates, political parties, etc. So the BNC is the largest coalition ever assembled in Palestinian society, and that's the coalition that leads and coordinates the BDS movement all over the world. A few important things to mention here about what BDS is at its core and what its values are. First of all, BDS targets complicity, not identity. So it's an anti-racist movement, and that's extremely important. Another important thing is that the movement targets institutions and not individuals. It's a movement of non-violence, of non-violent disruption. And it's deeply rooted in decades of Palestinian popular non-violent resistance against or to Israeli settler colonialism. It's an intersectional movement, and this is really, really key and really important. So BDS, over the course of the 2 decades in which it has existed, has nurtured deep connections with struggles for racial, economic, social, climate, and gender justice all over the world. We're going to talk a little bit more about this when we talk about boycott specifically, but this is at the core of everything that BDS does, no matter where we might be in the globe. Now, what does BDS actually want? Here I will turn, and I won't do this very often, I promise, but I will read a fairly long quote here because I think it's important and it's valuable. And it comes from the original call from Palestinian Society for BDS, which was issued on the 9th of July of 2005. I always recommend anyone who's interested about BDS to go and read that call. It's a very short call. It's a one-page document, basically. But this is the key part here for our purposes. We, representatives of Palestinian civil society, call upon international civil society organizations and people of conscience all over the world to impose broad boycotts and implement divestment initiatives against Israel, similar to those applied to South Africa in the apartheid era. These nonviolent punitive measures should be maintained until Israel meets its obligation to recognize the Palestinian people's inalienable right to self-determination and fully complies with the precepts of international law by, and this is the key part here, these are the three basic demands of the BDS movement for the past 20 years. 1, ending Israeli occupation and colonization of all Arab lands and dismantling the apartheid wall. 2, recognizing the fundamental rights of the Arab Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel, of the 1948 borders of Israel, to full equality. And 3, respecting, protecting, and promoting the rights of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and properties as stipulated in UN Resolution 194. These are the three basic demands, the three basic rights that Palestinians have under international law that have been affirmed and reaffirmed over decades in different UN resolutions, ICJ decisions, etc., without which Palestinians can't exercise the even more fundamental rights that they have to self-determination. And each one of those rights focuses on a specific broad segment of Palestinian society. So the first one, and the occupation and the colonization, focuses on the Palestinians living under military occupation in Palestine, in the West Bank, including in Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. The second one focuses on the Palestinians who live within the 1948 borders of Israel, who still live under racial segregation and apartheid. And the third right speaks to the Palestinian refugees, both inside Palestine and all over the world. So what BDS calls for, what it asks for the global solidarity movement with Palestinians to do and to aim for and to campaign for is quite simple, and can be summarized in this principle here that's borrowed from medical practice. First, do no harm. End complicity. The most effective way of showing meaningful solidarity with Palestinians, it's the BDS movement's argument, is by cutting the chains of complicity that surround us, wherever we might be, in the globe, whatever we might be involved in terms of what spaces and institutions we're a part of, etc. The second thing that's really important to understand is that BDS is a legal obligation. States and institutions have the duty, not the option, not to be complicit in occupation, apartheid, and genocide. That duty exists under international law. And so BDS is not a favor that Palestinians ask of institutions and of governments all over the world. It's not the ceiling, it's the floor. It's the bare minimum, is to end complicity. Now, let's take a look at how BDS actually works, because this is obviously extremely broad and extremely difficult to accomplish in this task of any complicity, because it exists in several different levels, from the very local to the international. Before we take a look at the letters in BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, it's important to take a look at some fundamental operational principles that guide the work of BDS in pretty much every single case. The first one is called gradualness. So that means incrementalism in building power to achieve our ultimate goals. So it's the realization that this task, in almost all cases, is not going to come all at once, and we need to be able to make incremental or gradual gains in order to, over the course of time, build the people power necessary in order to be successful. That gradualness is important to keep in mind. Doesn't necessarily mean slowness. Gradual doesn't necessarily mean slow. It often does, but it might not. And it definitely doesn't mean doing things in a compromised way. The second one, sustainability. So that means sustaining victories and building on them to move forward. That ties into the first principle. It's no good to be able to achieve several gradual victories if you give up those gains, you know, in the course of time, in the short term or in the midterm. So sustainability is another important principle of BDS. And lastly, context sensitivity. So adapting the tactics to suit the political cultural context. So the tactics that the movement is going to adopt to run a campaign in, say, Egypt are unlikely to be the same that the movement is going to adopt for a campaign in the Netherlands or in Germany or in Brazil or wherever you might be. And BDS is always very adaptable in that sense. The strategy remains the same everywhere, but the tactics can and should be adopted to the particular context. Okay, now let's take a look at the core BDS work and why it has this name to begin with, because these are the three key pillars of the strategy and also the tactics of BDS. First, boycotts. Here, we need to take a look at another kind of high-level list of principles which BDS abides by. And this one pertains to how do you select, in the case of a consumer boycott, a particular company or corporation to be boycotted. Complicity is everywhere, unfortunately. There's countless companies that are complicit all over the world with the Israeli oppression of Palestinians. So you need to be able to pick them. The first and most important principle, and that kind of goes without saying, is the level of complicity. So what's the proven, research-based level of complicity of a particular company? The second one is intersectionality. And again, this is an extremely important aspect of BDS. So what's the cross-movement relevance? I'll give you an example. Take Chevron, for instance, which is a BDS boycott target, the fossil fuel giant. Chevron is a BDS target because it's deeply complicit as the main company exploiting the gas fields off the coast of Palestine, the Leviathan gas fields, which provides, obviously, fuel for Israeli occupation, apartheid and genocide, but also enriches Israeli coffers with tax revenue, etc. But obviously, that's not the only bad thing that Chevron is doing in its dealings, you know, which happen at a global level. Chevron, of course, is, for instance, causing the dispossession and violence, indeed violence against indigenous communities in South America. Not to mention the fact that Chevron is just literally helping destroy the planet. So here you have the potential for a really large coalition, to join a really large coalition in fighting Chevron and its harmful effects all over the world. So Palestine is one aspect of it, but you can join forces with the struggle of indigenous people in Latin America and South America, and you can join forces with the global climate justice movement to target Chevron. So this is kind of how a question that is always that the movement always asks when it decides to target a company: is there potential to build a cross-movement coalition? The next one is brand recognition and media appeal. So how big that affects the answer to this question: how big of an audience can we reach? That is not the main consideration, but it's a consideration. So all other aspects being equal, level of complicity, intersectionality, etc. If we must choose, maybe there's no reason to, but if we must, then that comes into play because it helps the campaign be successful. And lastly, that's the potential. The last factor to consider is the potential for success of the campaign itself. So how likely, given all of this, are we to reach our goals? And there's always a specific goal. There's also, when BDS calls for a boycott against a corporation, there is always a until. They're to be boycotted until they abide by the demands of the BDS movement and then the complicity by doing such and such and such. And then once that's done, then they cease to be a target of the BDS movement. So the other key thing to keep in mind here when we talk about boycotts is that to be effective, efforts must be collective. So I'm sure many of you have probably seen lists on social media, like graphics of like just literally hundreds of companies, the boycott list, and asking you to boycott every single one of those companies. That's not really how BDS works. And we're going to take a look at the current BDS targets in a second, but it's important to keep that principle in mind because that's a question that is often asked when we talk about those targets. Why isn't X or YZ company a BDS target? Well, first of all, it might just not comply with all of the requirements of the selection criteria that I just showed you, but also you need to take things one thing at a time sometimes, because we want to bring a lot of pressure, a lot of people power onto a few select targets instead of diluting our efforts among tons of them, in which case we're very unlikely to be successful in any of them. So these are the current consumer boycott targets of the BDS movement. So first we had the priority targets. BDS calls for a complete boycott of the products and services of these corporations because, first and foremost, of their proven research-based level of complicity and because they fulfill all the other criteria that I showed you. Then there's the pressure targets. These are also companies that are deeply, deeply complicit. In fact, you can see some of the most complicit companies, period, here, especially the tech giants. But it's difficult to call for a complete boycott of their products and services because many of them are monopolistic. But that doesn't mean that you let them off the hook. That just means that you, instead of calling for a complete boycott, you call for a boycott whenever possible, for sure, but also to utilize other tactics such as strategic litigation, protests, obviously, pressure from within, from the workers, to force the company and to pressure them to end their complicity. And then there's the organic targets. These are also companies for which BDS calls for a complete boycott, but that just means that there were campaigns that were not initiated by BDS. These are campaigns that began organically in many different parts of the world, and BDS officially endorses them because all of these companies have proven meaningful complicity. And then there's the academic, culture, and sports boycotts, which are a complete subject unto themselves. These are led by PACB, the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. Again, too much to cover here, but two things that I feel are important to mention. First is, why does BDS call for an academic boycott of Israel? The reason for that is that, again, complicity, not identity, is not merely because they are Israeli, but because every single Israeli institution of higher learning is deeply complicit in occupation, in apartheid, and in genocide. They're complicit by helping develop the weapon systems that kill Palestinians. They're complicit by developing the military doctrines that help oppress and also kill Palestinians. They're complicit in developing the creative interpretations of international law that shield Israel from accountability, or try at least in the global stage. They're complicit in the demographic engineering of Palestine to exclude as many Palestinians from the land as possible and to ensure that they are minorities everywhere in Palestine. Not to mention when the presence of the university themselves is a tool for settler colonialism, as is often the case, or when they're just like simply based in territory which is illegally occupied in international law, as is the case of Ariel University in the West Bank. And then as far as cultural and sports boycotts are concerned, you remember that I mentioned earlier, and I just mentioned it again actually, that it's about complicity, not identity, and also institutions, but not individuals. However, when institutions don't just exist in our heads, they are represented by individuals. When an individual is appearing publicly or chooses to represent an institution that is complicit, or indeed the government of Israel itself, then they could be a target of a boycott as well. A very simple example is Eurovision. It's not a boycott against whatever Israeli singer might be representing Israel in that particular year. It's a boycott against Israel taking part in that forum to begin with. And so it's completely valid to call for a boycott of the competition, which is going to be focused on that particular year on an individual. And the same with sports boycotts. Obviously, you're representing Israel in international competition if you're an Israeli athlete. And also in other cultural fields. So if a particular Israeli filmmaker or actor chooses to be a vehicle, a mouthpiece for, say, the government of Israel, then their films can be a target of a boycott as well. Divestment, we won't talk too much about divestment because our time is limited, and divestment is more relevant for institutions rather than individuals. But suffice to say this: all entities, be they institutions, pension and investment funds, companies, city councils, unions, churches, etc., should do, at the bare minimum, the following two things. First of all, where applicable, adopt an illegal investment policy or a universal human rights-based investment screen to prevent investments in all companies complicit in human rights violations anywhere, not just in Palestine. And two, divest whenever possible from as many as feasible of the complicit companies listed in these 5 reliable and well-referenced databases. So first of all, we have the American Friends Service Committee, AFSC, who have a list of companies that provided Israel with weapons and other military equipment in its genocide in Gaza. That's number 1, divest from weapons manufacturers. Then there's the AFSC investigated database of companies enabling the occupation more broadly. There's a UN database of businesses involved in Israel's illegal settlement enterprise. There's the Who Profits database of Israeli and international corporations that are profiting from the occupation. And then lastly, Don't Buy Into Occupation, which focuses on businesses involved in the occupation and illegal settlement enterprise, which have European financial institutions as investors. Lastly, sanctions. So here we're talking about public responsibility, government responsibility to ending complicity. This is the last time I'm going to read from a fairly dense quote, but I think it is really important. This comes from the ICJ advisory opinion of July of last year, which ruled that the entire Israeli presence in the occupied Palestinian territory of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, is completely illegal and must end as soon as possible. That was a landmark decision, and it didn't stop there. It also said that Israel is guilty of apartheid against Palestinians for the first time, landmark decision, but also spoke to the obligation of third states, so states that are not Israel or Palestinians, to end their complicity by doing the following. First of all, it states that all states are under an obligation not to recognize as legal the situation arising from the unlawful presence of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory. So not to give it diplomatic cover, not to shield it from accountability. They are also under an obligation not to render aid or assistance in maintaining the situation created by Israel's illegal presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. So again, BDS is a legal obligation, it's not an option, and states have the obligation to not help sustain or maintain the situation in Palestine, the illegal occupation, not to mention the genocide, of course, and to end their complicity, to take active measures to end their complicity wherever it may exist. First of all, the bare minimum is imposing a military embargo against Israel. So that includes the export, import, and transfer of weapons, military equipment, and dual-use items. That means items that have both military and civilian applications, as well as ending all other forms of military cooperation, including training, joint research, investments, etc. That's number one. That's the bare minimum. Then they also have the obligation to impose lawful sanctions that go beyond the military embargo. So lawful and targeted sanctions, including diplomatic, economic, and financial ones. They have a duty to help eradicate apartheid. So one key way of enabling that is reactivating the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid to help eradicate Israel's regime of apartheid and hold those responsible accountable. And then lastly, but just as important, suspend Israel from the United Nations, the Olympics, FIFA, UEFA, and international and regional forums and events, again, just as was done with apartheid South Africa. We're going to take a quick look at BDS's impact because it's just too much to cover. There's so much that we could talk about. We could talk about Spain imposing a military embargo this year against Israel. We could talk about Colombia banning coal exports to Israel. We could talk about the dozens and dozens of universities all over the world cutting ties with Israel. We could talk about the meaningful solidarity of dock workers in Europe and in Africa refusing to load weapons destined for Palestine. And we could also talk about the strikes that were just staged in Italy and Spain in solidarity with Palestine. We could talk about the financial losses that companies like McDonald's and Coca-Cola are suffering as a result of boycotts. We talk about Puma ending its sponsorship contract with the Israeli Football Association in December 2023 after a long BDS campaign. We could talk about the biggest BDS win ever in nominal terms, Intel halting a construction of a $25 billion factory in Israel. We could talk about the filmmakers for Palestine who have pledged, over 1,000 of them, to boycott Israeli film companies. We could talk about Carrefour, another BDS target, quitting several markets, including Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan, after BDS boycott pressure. And we could talk about the response from Israel themselves and from within Israel. Where, for instance, 130 top economists have warned the government that their policy endangers Israel's existence and that the Israeli economy is risking entering a spiral of collapse, their words. And to stick to that for a second, let's take a look at a few quotes from certain key people inside of Israel on BDS and its impact. So first, the chairman of the Israel Export Institute said, BDS and boycotts have changed Israel's global trade landscape. Economic boycotts and BDS organizations present major challenges, and in some countries, we are forced to operate under the radar. The vice president for international affairs at the University of Haifa said, I'm afraid the genie is out of the bottle, talking about academic boycotts, and it will be difficult to put it back in. And the president of Israel himself at the time said that BDS is a strategic threat of the highest degree, and indeed the Israeli government has spent piles and piles of money, billions of dollars, to try to fight BDS in different countries, to demonize it, to smear it, to try to enact legislation against it, etc. So they take the threat of BDS very, very seriously, which means that BDS is working. So, how do you get involved? There are several ways to do that. First, start or join a BDS campaign at your university, your workplace, your trade union, or any space that you are a part of. There's so much activity already happening, regardless of the type of institution or type of space that we're talking about. There's a good chance that you don't need to start something yourself. So look for ways to join already existing campaigns, and if you don't find one, or if you're not happy with them, then you can start one yourself. You can join a local BDS group, and we have a BDS Berlin group here in Berlin. That gentleman over there working the camera is a member of it. So if you're interested in BDS Berlin, sorry to put you on the spot, Björn. Feel free to talk to him afterwards. And lastly, and obviously, pressure your government to end complicity. Much easier to say than do in this particular country, obviously, as well as in pretty much every single country in the world, but still important nonetheless, and it becomes even more important when you're talking about a government that is so deeply complicit, such as this one. And even here, we're starting to see a little bit of movement. Much too little, much too late, obviously, but a little bit of movement. So we need to keep up that pressure, and we need to pressure German institutions and also political parties to support BDS, to help fight the initiatives that try to attack BDS, demonize it, and eventually bring that pressure to the government themselves. And then lastly, I wanted to focus specifically on this just for a moment because it's something that I feel a lot of people are not aware of. You can become an apartheid-free zone. The Apartheid-Free Zones campaign is a campaign run by coordinated, led by the BDS movement, in which any space, from a digital space to a physical space, from a podcast to a local business to an entire city, can declare itself an apartheid-free zone, which means that it ends any current ties of complicity, if they exist, and they commit not to engage in any in the future. You can find a little bit more about it at bdsmovement.net /apartheid-free-zones. There's an entire guide there showing how you can begin this journey, what is it that you have to do, and then in the end, you can declare yourself an apartheid-free zone, which is a really important and really meaningful show of solidarity, and your space can be added to a global map that BDS has on the website, which includes over 1,000 already existing apartheid-free zones all over the world. So this is an example of one of them, the Bang Bang Cafe in Dublin. So it could be, like I said, a business, it could be a cafe, it could be a restaurant. We have bookstores that are apartheid-free zones. We have record shops that are apartheid-free zones. So this is a really nice and simple way in the sense that you have control over it and the other people involved in your space have full control over it for you to show meaningful solidarity. Now, I hope that some of the takeaways that you get from this are, first of all, that BDS is very complex. It acts in a bunch of different ways. It utilizes a bunch of different tactics. But at the end of the day, it's about one very simple thing, ending complicity, first to no harm. And it's about the arguments that is the first and most meaningful way that we should try and show meaningful solidarity with Palestinians. Second, that you can get involved, no matter where you are, what space you occupy. Complicity is all around us. That's the bad news. The good news is that gives each of us a place to start. And then the last one, the last thing is that we can do it, that it is doable. I remember months ago, I was having a conversation. I was basically doing the BDS pitch to my mom, who didn't know what BDS was. And she is, she's a person that her heart is in the right place, but she's very jaded when it comes to politics. So she was basically making the argument that this all sounds beautiful, it sounds super nice, but I don't see it happening. This is just the forces against it are too great. It's commendable, but I don't think it will ever succeed. And I asked her because I wasn't there to see it, but I asked her honestly if back in the 70s and in the 80s, she thought in her heart that it was possible that apartheid in South Africa would ever end, that she would ever see that day. And she very quickly said, no, I could not begin to imagine that happening. As a matter of fact, I never thought Nelson Mandela would leave prison, let alone apartheid fall in South Africa. So it seemed impossible until it happened. And thanks to, of course, the principal resistance, steadfast resistance of South Africans, and this incredible solidarity movement all over the world, South Africa had its moment. And I hope that you believe it in your heart that Palestine-South Africa moment is nearing, because it is. And I hope that you will join thousands, millions of people active in the BDS movement all over the world in making sure that that moment comes, and that it comes soon, because we don't have any time to waste. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. I'm sure that there's lots of questions. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand, and I think somebody's going to come around with the microphone. We're going to collect a few questions. I already see one over here, 2, 3, and 4. We'll do that to begin, and then we can do another round. If you keep your hands up, thank you. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, you recently published a video where you told that the link is going to vote for BDS on the 15th of November. And I thought that was a very important moment. And I thought that as civil society and activists, we should also support this moment. And more recent news, like I understood that maybe this vote is not going to happen. So my question is actually more to the public than to you. What is the latest stance on this? And yeah, is the vote going to take place? And how can we all help to make the link a bit more anti-colonial again?
Thank you very much for your informative talk. I just checked on the website of BDF the apartheid-free zones, and I saw that in Germany there are only a couple in Cologne and no more across Germany. Do you know if there have been tried to open up apartheid-free zones in Berlin, for example, and what are the concrete problems that they have faced, and how can we support them to go ahead and open up and be shown on the map?
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a member of the National Tertiary Education Union in Australia, and I'm proud to say that last year we became a pro-BDS union through a motion that we passed at our national conference, something that took many years of political work before that. What we've found, though, is that even though there are unionised workers in Australian universities who want to apply BDS principles in their workplaces, we don't have in most areas, we don't have the kind of industrial strength to actually, put those principles into practice. We've got, bosses in universities which are highly complicit in a whole range of ways, directing people to do, research work or similar, such that they are kind of forced to be complicit. So I guess I've got two questions. One is what advice you give to unionised workers seeking to apply boycotts and similar actions, but who are being forced because of the power of bosses into complicity. And the second question is a bit broader. It's just about the role you see for unionised workers in general in ending apartheid in Palestine. I mean, you mentioned Italy and Spain, really inspiring, transformative stuff. So, what's the next step for, for workers?
Yeah, thank you. Also connecting to the former two questions, say you're, like I work in a psychological consulting company of sorts with lots of people quite left-leaning and hearts in their right places. But if, for instance, I wanted to push the initiative to become an apartheid-free zone, starting points would be something like, well, most obvious complicity would be something like having Microsoft as one client, and or the other would be half of the laptops, at least, that we use Intel processors. and the company doesn't have much leeway financially. And so I wonder if you have recommendations about how to make the case and where to start with a company like that. Like, would you throw out all laptops using Intel processors, or would you stop collaboration with boycotted companies first? What's the point that you would make, basically?
Okay, these are all great questions. Thanks for asking them. So first of all, with regards to Die Linke, you said it yourself that the question is more for the public, but I'm not quite sure what the status is on the vote. But I know that has been drafted, and last I heard, it was going to be put forth. I think there's a lot of motion, so the part that wasn't clear whether they were going to get to it. But regardless, I think it's important to put pressure on all political parties, but especially political parties such as Die Linke, to stand with BDS and not to be coyed or intimidated by the countless attempts to demonize and even criminalize BDS here in Germany. I'm sure we have a lot of people here who are members of Die Linke, so I invite you once again, as I did already, to bring this up in whatever meetings you go, to talk to the delegates that are going to be at the Parteitag, to pressure that this is debated and approved, because it will be a landmark thing. It will be on the state level in Berlin, but it would also commit Die Linke to campaigning for this at the federal level as well. On the question about apartheid-free zones, yeah, there's a reason I decided to focus on this for this particular presentation, is the fact that we don't have a lot of them in Germany, unfortunately. But it seems to me, and also just to answer directly to your question, I'm not quite sure if there have been attempts that ran into issues. I don't imagine that that's the case, but I don't know that for a fact. I think it's just the fact that word hasn't really gotten out there very much about the campaign. So, especially in an environment as hostile as Germany for Palestine activism in general, and specifically for BDS, it is again something that you, and meaning you, like collectively the people in charge of that space, have complete control over. So there might still be intimidation attempts, of course, I wouldn't put it past them, but it seems that it's for a lot of people and a lot of contexts, it's a plural of context, I forget now. Anyway, you get what I mean. It's a simple way to start, at least. On trade union solidarity, I mean, that is just so vital, you know. It's really, really key. And you see the solidarity that you mentioned, that I mentioned in the presentation as well, from workers in Italy and Spain. But not only there, it happened in France as well. It happened in Morocco. It happened in different countries. That is key because, you know, almost any progressive struggle either needs or would be vastly profit from trade union involvement. So that's key. The intersectional aspect of it is also really key. And there's also the fact that, you know, that helps build people power for BDS. It helps build people power for the workers. And I want to stress that it also obviously doesn't stop with dock workers and people actually involved in transporting cargo and weapons. We are seeing tremendous solidarity from the No Tech for Apartheid collective, for instance, in the US. These are Google and Amazon workers and Microsoft workers that are fighting from the inside. Many of them, you know, it cost them their jobs to end the complicity of their employers. With regards to the particular issues that you're facing, that's obviously very common. There's, in almost every case, going to be at least some level of resistance and some fight back. The answer that I'm going to give you is not very satisfactory, but I think it's the correct one. I can't advise you specifically on how to fight those fights in your particular context. What I can tell you is that BDS has a lot of resources that have been published on this with, you know, best practices and tactical advice, etc. And you can also reach out to the BDS movement directly through the website and ask for assistance if you need it. what was the last question? Somebody help me. Should we throw away the laptops? No, we should not throw away the laptops. But something that's really key here when we talk about boycotts is ethical procurement policies. So that's something that that's always a good thing to try to do in your workplace. So BDS will never make a company a priority boycott target if there aren't alternatives for their products. So when we talk about office supplies, when we talk about laptops, printers, etc., we have some targets there. We have Intel, we have Microsoft, we have HP, we have Dell. That's a lot of targets, but this is a market where there's a lot of different options as well. So Intel chips can be easily avoided with AMD chips. The printers, obviously, it's not HP making them. It's different types of printers. There's also the cartridges. A friend of mine once told me she worked as a office manager at the time, and one of her tasks was to order new HP cartridges for the printer. And she ordered off-brand ones because she wanted to boycott HP. The off-brand ones didn't work because they have, copyright protection or whatever. So she melted the chips from the original empty cartridges and put them in the off-brand ones, and then they worked. And without realizing it, that workplace joined the boycott HP campaign. It's much better when they do it willingly, of course, and they say to the company why they're doing it, but we do what we can. So yes, ethical procurement policy, if you don't know where to start in your workplace, is usually a good option. Sometimes it's complicated. There's already contracts in place or whatever. BDS is not asking for you to do everything all at once, but you can just start somewhere. You can not commit to renew those contracts or to make any new ones.
We'll do a few more questions. We have enough time for maybe 3 or 4 more. So if you want to raise your hand, if you still have a question on your mind. Yeah, we have one here. 2, 3. Hi, sorry. Okay, we'll take these 3 for now, and then if you want to keep your hands up, that would be really useful.
Yeah, thank you, Lucas, for your work. I'm part of the LAG Palästina Solidarität within the Left Party. We've submitted the motion for the next state party conference that is on the 15th of November. And we are demanding the decriminalization of BDS and PACB, as well as support for civil society initiatives against apartheid and occupation. If you ask us how can you support this, you can on Instagram and Twitter write Die Linke Berlin, write Elif, she wants to be the head of the state in Berlin, and so the Palestinian solidarity movement should demand, if you want to be the head of the state in Berlin, you have to take a stance against the repression, against the Palestine movement. Nobody will support a left party that is not on the side of the Palestinian people. A left party doesn't deserve the support of the people if it doesn't do that. And I have the question to Lucas. You said, of course, we can support existing campaigns. For example, for students, it makes sense to organize for an academic boycott and something like this. But I have the question, what do you think about a general unifying campaign where all the trade unions, students, normal people could come together? For example, a campaign to end the city partnership with Tel Aviv. In my mind, there's the idea of something like Deutsche Wohnen Enteignen, to make a referendum against this partnership, and so to go to the houses, talk with the people, or maybe what you said, apartheid-free zone. We demand that Berlin will be an apartheid-free zone. I don't know, I think there are many ideas we could have, but I think it would be
important to unify all these fights so that not the students make their fights, and in the trade unions we have our fights, and in the left party we have our fights. So, but that we get an idea of coming together and have one demand and fight together for it.
Thank you. Could you maybe talk a little bit about the BDS resolution from 2009 and the chilling effect, and if there is any way to roll that back in a way?
Yeah, first of all, on your question, I like how you think, because that's kind of like I stressed over and over. That's one of the principles of BDS, intersectionality. So tying those struggles together, for instance, the one that you mentioned, housing here in Berlin, to something Palestine related. You mentioned the city twinning agreement. That's on paper that's a wonderful idea. Whether that's makes sense tactically in this particular moment, that's for the people involved in those campaigns to decide, essentially. But the thinking here is absolutely correct. We should be trying to find ways to link different struggles with Palestine, with any complicity on the oppression of Palestinians. Obviously, I can only hope that I live enough to see the day that Berlin becomes an apartheid-free zone. Then the gradualness comes into play here of the first operational principle of BDS. Are we likely to win this campaign right now? Not really, but we can start building smaller wins, defend them, and build the people power necessary to eventually get there and end complicity in Berlin and in Germany more broadly altogether. But that's how that takes shape. I'm not going to be very prescriptive about it here, because it's for the people involved in the different campaigns to decide tactically and strategically which targets make sense, which demands make sense, and which coalitions make sense. On the resolution, look, I always tell people, a lot of people come to me and say that they thought that BDS was illegal in Germany. And that makes me sad, because that was the goal of the resolution. They can't fight this in courts. Every time that they tried, the courts ruled in favor of BDS as protected speech in Germany. So the only thing that they can do is create the atmosphere that BDS is illegal. And to an extent, they succeeded in that resolution, but I think that's slowly being rolled back. And they tried it again with this more recent resolution as well, condemning BDS. But I can tell you from my perspective as a BDS activist, living here, that the only thing that you can do is not allow yourself to be intimidated by it. BDS is a non-violent, anti-racist human rights movement. If they want to make that illegal, go ahead and try it. They are trying it, but try harder. And until that day comes, I'm just gonna keep, shouting BDS from the top of my lungs. That's it.
Hi, thank you, Lucas. You said so many things already that I have to restructure what I was going to say, because you responded to it. But the resolution was 2019, not 9. And I think it's really important to remember this happened under Merkel, CDU, SPD, and FDP. But yes, it led to people thinking that BDS is illegal and BDS is anti-Semitic. So my question is kind of, in what way do you approach this? Because every single goal that BDS has human reasons behind it. So in promoting BDS, do you always stand firmly and say BDS, like you lead with the words and with the words of BDS, or do you think it's sometimes smart to lead with human rights arguments that don't name it BDS? I'm just talking about Germany, where idiots think it is anti-Semitic. So, yeah, strategic ways.
Yeah, so the way I approach it, first of all, is the way I just approach it. You know, I mentioned that BDS targets complicity, not identity. It's an anti-racist movement. It targets institutions, not individuals. If that's not enough, you know, then first of all, there's a good chance that whoever you're speaking to or whoever is questioning you is not acting in good faith to begin with. There's nothing that you can tell them that is going to convince them that BDS is not the awful, immoral movement that they think it is. Personally, I don't, you know, I don't waste my time too much trying to engage in that. Yeah, and yes, the other thing that I wanted to mention is, look, BDS is a movement about liberating Palestine. It's not a movement about, you know, BDS brand awareness. As long as the initiative, the campaign, works towards ending complicity, then it doesn't matter if BDS is spelled out there or not. I'll give you an example, and I want to make clear that I'm not speaking for this campaign. I wasn't involved in it, but just as someone looking at it from the outside, the Film Workers for Palestine campaign and the wonderful initiative that they did that's been supported by over 1,000 film workers and actors now, a lot of really big names as well from Hollywood, like usually one of the hardest places to get any sort of initiative like that off the ground. If you look at the text, it doesn't spell out BDS anywhere. And there might have been a strategic decision in that sense, you know, because it's you have to acknowledge that to an extent they've succeeded in demonizing BDS, you know, the pro-Israel lobby and Israel itself. But again, the demand of the campaign is ending complicity. It's meaningful solidarity. It's boycotting complicit Israeli film institutions, festivals, etc. So, you know, BDS is going to be all for it. And that's the main point here, is about ending complicity. And it doesn't really matter what it says on the tin, as long as the demands are, you know, for the basic rights that Palestinians have.